That said, now let's finally get into being in time. I'm going to put this in just so that now we're actually now going, although nothing that I've said today actually is going to detract from what we've done or will do with being in time. So turn with me though, so we're going to quickly just review. What Heidegger is after here is existence, right? He's not after us as a category of things. So if humans were minds and bodies, then the best way that we could study that would be categorically. Categorical, I'll give it 2 L's. Right? Now, the method of studying things categorically is just the scientific method. This is how you study things that have definite ontical, not existence, being, right? That is, that have shape, color, size, weight, density, chemistry, all of that, right? But what Heidegger is after is understanding existence, right? What is the name of the being that has existence as its way of being? Carly? Dasein, right? Yeah, some of you are going to say it, but we're afraid to, right? Dasein exists, right? Other things do not. So what we want to get at then, if we were studying things with the scientific method that were categorical things, right? That would be categorically. We're trying to get at existence, so we're going to hit existentially, right? We're going to study it existentially. Now, some of the structures of things that have category as their way of being, or that are categorical, are things like shape, and size, and weight, and color, right? These are the structures of a thing that is scientifically studied categorically, right? Or things that have category as their way of being. Existentially, Dasein does not have shape, size, weight, or color as its way of being. It has existence as its way of being. And existence can be taken apart into its structures. And its structures involve one of the structures of existence is being in the world, right? So whereas a marker has a shape or a color, a Dasein has a being in the world. It's just a structure of existence. Therefore, it's an existentiale. And when you find an actual Dasein in an actual world, living in that world, then you're dealing with an existentielle. That's just the way someone is actually existing, right? You're not dealing with existential analysis because that's just what belongs to existence in general. You're dealing with just some particular one. Now, being in the world breaks down, even though it's a unitary phenomenon, right? It all happens all at once. Another way to say that is it's an emergent thing. It does not break down to its parts. It is something that comes in new when you get all the parts in the right way. Something else suddenly is there, and it isn't coming from those parts, although the parts have to be there for it to be emerging. So you have to start with being in the world. But in order to get at and wrap your mind around being in the world as a unitary phenomenon, we are going to deal with being in, and then we're going to deal with in the world, and then we're also going to deal with just world, right? All three of those things we have to deal with. Now, when Heidegger says being in, this is section 12 and 13, maybe now section 13. What does he mean by being in? No, that's 12, right? Because we talked about this. Being in, he gives you one word, he coins a new word for it. Dasein's being in is facticity, right? And it's different than being in, like a marker is in the classroom. The classroom is at Prairie State College. In the college is in Chicago Heights is in Chicagoland is in the United States, right? That kind of being in is just one thing that has what kind of being? What kind of being belongs to this marker? Yes, Deja, you're right. Present at hand, right? This marker is just present at hand. Is Dasein also present at hand? It's a trick question, huh? Yes and no. In what way is Dasein present at hand? What do you call that part of you which is present at hand? Body. Right on, right? You have a body, and you know that body is yours, and you live with that body, you feel that body, you experience that body as mine, right? As mineness in many ways. And so you can be something merely present at hand, right? Can you treat another person like they're just another thing in the world, an object? Should you? Maybe not, but can you? Yes, right? You can, right? There are some people who would stab another person and feel about as bad about that as they would stabbing a mattress, right? It's just another thing in the world to stick a knife into, right? You can treat people like they are just present at hand. You even know you can be treated like just something present at hand, right? But in that way, you're very different from something that's just present at hand, because chairs and tables and markers don't think of themselves as things that can be present at hand, right? So that kind of being, which knows itself as being there as a thing that is there among other things, as a present at hand thing among present at hand things, but not just a present at hand thing, although you are a present at hand thing. That's facticity, right? Or the way he says it, you know that your destiny is wrapped up in the destiny of the things in the world around you, right? Facticity is an important concept in being in time. So we're going to come back to this and we're going to read a little bit more of it. Turn with me to page 83. Facticity here, he wants to distinguish it from the naive supposition. Facticity is not this, that your Dasein is a spiritual thing and your body is a physical thing, and your spiritual thing or your mental thing or your experience thing just happens to be taking up residence in this body for a little while, right? Spirit is in the body. It's not how it works. So look at page 83, the paragraph that begins, Dasein's facticity. It's the very top of that. Dasein's facticity is such that its being in the world has always dispersed itself or even split itself up into definite ways of being in. That is, you're already in a certain way of being in things. You split yourself into certain ways of being into things. Don't worry, we'll see what that means. The multiplicity of these is indicated by the following examples. Multiplicity just means the whole bunchedness of them, right? There's just a whole bunch of ways. All of those ways are like this, having to do with something. What does that mean, to have to do with something? Like if I were to say, what do you have to do with that? What am I asking you? Yeah, what if you're dealing with this? How connected are you to it, right? Like if one guy in a store steals a candy bar, and the officer grabs the guy who stole the candy bar and grabs you, Chris. And he goes, what do you got to do with this? What is he asking of you? Like, what do you know he's asking about you?
What I know about.
Yeah, how are you connected, right? How do you know about this? How are you connected with this guy? Did you have anything to do with this, right? What have you got to do with this? That is one of the ways that Dasein is in space. It's having to do with things, right? What have you got to do with this class right now? You have some way to do with it. You have that way of doing it that as a student has a way of doing with this class, right? It may be that you're just passively hoping I don't bother you because you're like, what the heck is he talking about? Don't ask me a question. Or it could be that you're actively involved. That's how you have to do with this, right? But you have having to do with it. That's a way of facticity, right? It's one of the ways that Dasein invests itself in the world. Really, factically, right? Having to do with something, producing something, attending to something, and looking after it, right? For instance, I've got a 22-month-old baby now, She runs around, she's starting to hit the terrible twos, she gets into all kinds of stuff. If I say to one of the kids, you're in charge, I'm going off to do whatever I do, you're in charge, you watch after the baby. All the other kids are there. I told you there's 7 of us, right? All the other kids are there, but they don't have to watch the baby. Only this one has to watch the baby. What did I just do to that facticity for that one child? I just gave it an assignment, right? I just created a kind of being in the world for that one, different from the other ones. The other ones are like, oh, we're going to go play. I can't go play, I gotta watch the baby, right? I have to stay here and do something, right? Attending to something and looking after it. That's a factical way of being. And it's different now. That kid can't watch TV the same way that the one sitting right next to her can watch TV. Why not? Because that 22-month-old is going to be off getting into Drano. And so you got to be one eye on the TV and one eye on the baby. The other kid doesn't have to do that. In the same environment, in completely different worlds. That's facticity, right? Starting to make some sense? Moving forward, then making use of something, giving something up and letting it go. Undertaking, accomplishing, evincing, interrogating, and considering, discussing, determining, ... Do you see, he could just keep on going like this forever. Why? Because we keep on going like this forever. We can keep doing different things in the world all the time. Sometimes we're determining, sometimes we're discussing, sometimes we're considering, sometimes we're interrogating, sometimes we're pretending, sometimes we're making use of things, we're producing things, we're watching things, we're letting things go, we're involved, we're uninvolved, right? It just goes on and on and on. So facticity is that way of talking about how you're engaged in the where you are. In what way you're engaged. And you can be engaged differently where you are, in different ways, multiply, at the same, slightly different times. Sometimes you're actively engaged, sometimes you're totally bored. And you're in the same place and you haven't moved, but you're in a totally different world. Tables and chairs, they can't do that. Dogs and cats don't do that. Dasein does that. The word for doing that is facticity. Right? Facticity. All these ways of being in have concern as their kind of being. A kind of being which we have yet to characterize in detail. Right? So all of this facticity is to help us to see concern. Now, if you remember what phenomenology is taking what seems to be the case and digging it deeper to getting at a phenomenon, right? And phenomenology is now let's study this guy, right? We don't want to get caught up in this. So whenever Heidegger says, well, on first blush, or what would be the obvious answer, what he's giving you is the seeming. And what he's going to do is take us to the phenomenon, right? So now we're finally starting to see that our being in an environment as a thing present at hand, that is just what it seems. What's beneath that is facticity, but what's beneath facticity? Facticity turns out to be just a seem. It seems to be facticity, but it is really concern. Do you think we're going to stop at concern? No. Concern is itself more fundamentally care. We're going to stop with care, kind of. But care, I'm just going to tell you where we're going, is eventually going to lead us to death. Care is on the basis of death. All of this is going to help us to understand what it is to have a world. If you end up at some point while reading Being in Time, being able to see the world as worldhood, if he can make that phenomenon become apparent, if he can uncover it, It's always there. It's average every day, the way we live our lives in a world. But it just is covered over. It's the thing closest to us. But if you eventually get to see this and it clicks, you go, I see the world for what it is. That's the aim. Because a world is what you are. You are not a body and a spirit. You are not a mind or a soul. You are a world. You are an active, unfolding, hidden from yourself, complicated, deceptive world. And what Heidegger wants you to see is the worldhood of the world. And the only time you really come face to face with it is when you face death, because death is the end of the world. Or the possibility, I should say, more technically, is the possibility of the end of the world. But it means nothing to you unless you have a world first, unless you see yourself as a world and what that means. So that's where we're headed, right? So we're going to go on. All these ways of being in have concern as their kind of being, a kind of being which we have yet to characterize in detail. So he's like, don't worry, we're going to get there. But first he's going to tell us what it is not, what it is to not be in a world. Leaving undone, neglecting, renouncing, taking a rest. These too are ways of concern. But these are all deficient modes in which the possibilities of concern are kept to a bare minimum. The term concern has, in the first instance, its colloquial signification. This is its apparent or seeming. It has, in its first instance, it's kind of average, everyday, and can mean to carry something, to carry out something, to get it done, to straighten it out, right? To concern yourself with something would mean to get busy with it, right? It can also mean to provide oneself with something. We use the expression with still another characteristic turn of phrase when we say, I am concerned for the success of the undertaking. I am concerned over this thing going well. Right? Here, concern means something like apprehensiveness. Right? When I say, I'm concerned about how well you're going to do in this class. Or if I say that, what does it mean? It means I'm kind of worried about how you're going to do. Right? If I say, hey, Adrian, will you talk with me after class?